My name is Ojasvi Chandok and I welcome you to Series 4 of the Festival of Bharat. We are a platform that believes in having civilized and open discussions. And today, here with us, we have Dr. Melissa Kapoor ji. Melissa ji runs a med tech company, and when she first visited Bharat, she fell in love with this place, our culture and heritage, and now she practices Sanatan Dharam. Melissa ji, pranam, namaste, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Namaste, Ojasvi, and thank you so much for inviting me.
It's lovely to have you. How have you been? I know COVID has been really difficult for a lot of us, and we are trying to cope with it. How are you doing today?
Yes, I'm doing very well. I must admit that I find that being a Hindu has made me very resilient through this whole COVID period. I've been turning to the Shastras and reflecting inward to find the strength through some of the challenging periods. And so I've always found that there's so much wisdom to be gaining from the Shastras through all of life's challenges. And when I look at some of my Western family who don't have that same sort of philosophy to fall back on, they've been really struggling.
Wow, that's such an incredible way to put it, Melissa ji. I'm really glad. Melissa ji, starting with my first question to you. I've read and I've heard you talk about it before. You have described the Hindu genocide as the biggest and longest genocide on earth. Only now are people beginning to understand this horrific reality, but the details for a lot of us are really sketchy. Could you please explain what exactly the genocide of Hindus refers to and what makes it the biggest and longest in human history?
Absolutely, and it's a very important question. So Hindu civilization, it's the oldest surviving civilization on earth, and there's evidence for its existence, spanning tens of thousands of years and right across the globe. Of course, there were other ancient civilizations as well, the Mayans, the Aztecs, the ancient Egyptians, the Persians, but they were all wiped out. Only Hindus survive, the only ancient civilization that survives. And it's important to celebrate that survival because, of course, it means that at least some knowledge still remains today, and many of the practices are still alive today. But that survival hides a very ugly truth. And that is that the same forces that destroyed the Mayans, the Persians, the ancient Egyptians, they also wreaked terrible damage on Bharat and on the Hindu civilization. So yes, Hindus survived, but it came at a very high cost. And there are, of course, many sort of popular narratives out there to try and almost excuse the Hindu genocide or even to deny it. And you may have been taught some of this in school. And it's what's reflected in Bollywood and other places. And it's important to realize that these narratives, they were created with an agenda. They're not objective. Now, there has been some very good research done to understand the extent of the Hindu genocide by, sadly, a relatively small number, but very dedicated individuals and people like Conrad Elstji, Francois Gauthier-ji, Stephen Knapp, an organization called Ishitva Dharma Sansthapan Foundation very recently. They have been collating all of the evidence of different epochs of genocide throughout the last 1,000 years of Hindus and trying to come up with like a total figure. And the consensus is it's certainly in the hundreds of millions, and that's a conservative estimate. And of course, on top of that, you have hundreds of millions more Hindus who have been raped, who have been forced to flee, who have been tortured, who have been forced to convert to Abrahamic religions. And all this began with the Islamic invaders, roughly the 11th century is when they were really giving it some. And their main mode of destruction, it was and of genocide, was physical destruction. It was killing, it was raping, it was destroying temples, it was burning down libraries. So a lot of destruction actually you can see today still in Bharat with your own eyes. And when people are researching these eras of Hindu history, you only have to look at the records of the perpetrators to get the figures to understand the extent of all of this genocide and destruction. So many of the Islamic invaders, their own secretaries, Muslim chroniclers, they themselves are the sources of these numbers. So for example, the Islamic conqueror Taimur boasts in the records of killing 100,000 Hindus in a single day. Or the Bahmani sultans, who make the record that they have a target of killing 100,000 Hindus a year, spanning a roughly 200-year period. And there are so many of these examples. The Hindu Kush mountains, which span Afghanistan and Pakistan, they're called Hindu Kush because Kush means slaughter. It's the mountains of the Hindu slaughter. And there are descriptions of there being such a rapid extermination of Hindus there that literally Hindu blood would flow down the mountains. So the extent of the genocide in these periods caused by these Islamic invaders, it's completely undeniable and it's very, very massive. But it's important to realize that Hindus, they fought back really valiantly. And in that way, actually, Bharat is quite unique because of all the countries that Islam tried to establish as a caliphate, to create an Islamic state, it didn't succeed in Bharat because the Hindus were so brave. And there are so many inspirational Hindus that we can be, as we grow up, to inspire us to become brave Hindus as well. And even in the 1600s, the Hindus, they fought back, and also the Sikhs, they fought back so strongly that actually the threat from the Islamists was really quite quelled, under the people such as Chhatrapati Shivaji and such. But unfortunately, that period was relatively short because it really wasn't long until the next set of invaders came in, the European colonizers. And yes, they again had an Abrahamic agenda, but their agenda was also economic. And the evidence shows that at least tens of millions of Hindus were killed by the British through the Portuguese Inquisition, the British labor camps, the different famines that were caused by Churchill, firing on peaceful protesting women and children, and then massacres by the Muslim League under the British watch. So the Noakhali massacre, the Mopla massacre, Direct Action Day. So certainly, a lot of blood, Hindu blood, was spilled by the British. But it's important to realize that genocide isn't necessarily just about physical killing, because the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of genocide is it's the destruction and the deliberate and systematic destruction of a racial, political, or cultural group. So it's not just about killing. You can destroy a cultural group in other ways. For example, cultural genocide. And this is where the European colonizers were very cunning and actually very effective in enacting genocide, not necessarily just through killing. So things like not just destroying temples, but taking control of temples and siphoning off their wealth, completely de-warriorizing or removing the Kshatriya tradition from Hindus by outlawing martial arts such as Kalaripayattu, replacing the really effective and holistic Bharatiya education system with a very biased anti-Hindu British education system, and also misinterpreting and deliberately mistranslating the Hindu Shastras to inject lies into the very literature of Hindu faith. So they were very effective at this cultural genocide as well as physical killings. And of course, this genocide, it's continuing. We're 72 years into India's independence now, but we still see this genocide carrying on. So since becoming independent, obviously the Hindus trapped in the neighboring countries, the Islamic State countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh, they have really faced some terrible, terrible existence, very harrowing accounts. In Bangladesh, 22% of the population were Hindus in 1951. But today that figure's more like 8%. In just the 1971 Bangladesh genocide that was committed by Pakistan, we know the figure of 3 million were killed. But what people don't realize is that nearly 85% of those 3 million killed were Hindus, even though actually Hindus only accounted for 19% of the population in Bangladesh at that time. And of course, genocide of Hindus is continuing in India as well. Take the 202 Godhra massacre of 59 Karsevaks in Gujarat, burned to death by a mob of 1,000 to 2,000 Islamists. And it continues to this day. So hardly a day goes by where you don't hear about a village in Bangladesh of Hindus being burnt down, or of a young Hindu girl in Pakistan being abducted and forced to marry a man 3 times her age of a different religion, or a Hindu in India being shot and stabbed, all for being Hindus. And just my last point is to emphasize that it's not just the Abrahamic faiths that are causing this genocide. I've been focusing on the Islamists and the British Raj with their Christian conversion agendas as well. But it's people of other ideologies, such as communists nowadays. And that's how the Hindu genocide is quite different from genocides of other communities, such as the Jews in Rwanda, in Armenia, because there the perpetrator was generally more of a singular group. Whereas here, when we have the Hindu genocide, there's a collaboration of many different disparate groups, each wanting their final goal of global domination, but collaborating to pick off what they see as the easiest target, which are Hindus. And if you can bring 100 billion Hindus and convert them to support your ideology or your religion, just imagine how they each become so much more powerful.
Right. Thank you so much for putting these facts in place for us, Melissa ji. And it's really insightful to understand it this way. On following up on that previous question, you mentioned that there are certain Hindu groups that are particularly focused on seeking to attack Dharam. Could you please explain which groups these are and why they are being targeted with heightened focus?
Okay, so the groups that are being targeted, this all stems back again to the Islamic invaders, when they realized just how difficult it is to convert a Hindu to Islam, or to win a battle against a Hindu army. And what they realized is that the philosophy of Sanatana Dharma is so complete, so empowering, it's so focused on protecting Dharma, and it's so effective at strengthening your mental well-being and your trust in Bhagwan, that actually people would choose being skinned alive or boiled alive over converting. They would choose to fight valiantly in a bloody war on the battlefield rather than have their homes raided. And the women would choose johar, or suicide, rather than being captured and raped. And so the Islamic invaders, they also realized, you know, where does all of this strength, this philosophy come from? And then seep through the Hindu population at large. And they realized it's Brahmins. The people who dedicate their lives to learning, teaching, and epitomizing Sanatana Dharma. And that is why in the 1600s, the Islamic leader Aurangzeb, he was advised that if he wanted to convert or kill all of the Hindu population in India, in Bharat, all he really needed to do was to convert and kill all of the Brahmins in Kashmir, the center of Hindu thought and learning at that time. And then the rest of India would fall very quickly. So that's what he set out to do. And this is really then the beginning of the legacy of vilification of Brahmins, which was very grossly spurred on by the British for their economic and their own conversion religious reasons, to make it easier for then the British to manipulate the people, to control them more easily. And this vilification of Brahmins, you know, it continues, and it continues to this day. And it's why things like the Maharashtrian Brahmin genocide in 1948 could occur. You know, 8,000 Brahmins killed in Maharashtra. It's responsible for the 7th exodus of Kashmiri Pandits. And in the last wave, you know, event in 1990, the figures are between 300,000 and 800,000 of the last remaining Kashmiri Hindus were given the choice of either convert to Islam or leave Kashmir, but leave behind your women, leave them in Kashmir, or die. And these and other genocides of Brahmins has been completely ignored by the world. And what's worse and really sickening, if I must say so, is the false narrative around Brahmins is so strong that there are communities out there that feel that, you know, they deserved all of this. It's absolutely sickening to hear, because, and it's completely engineered. That's why it's so dangerous. It's completely engineered to be taking control of the Hindus at large by targeting that one community. And that's why you so regularly see on social media, certainly, reports of temple pundits, sadhus being killed. And when I reflect on, you know, one particular case, the sadhus of Palga, if anything can be fortunate about this case, is that it was captured on video and shared very widely on social media, because I think it really helped people realize, or it highlighted just how barbaric people of these other ideologies, these other faiths feel towards Brahmins, sadhus, when you see how viciously they are punching and whacking these such innocent, sweet people to death, hacking them to death. It really does make your stomach churn. And it shows that indoctrinization of that hatred for Hindus at large, but concentrated on Brahmins. And the fact that the mainstream media had so little coverage of this event, and where they did cover it, you know, they would cover it completely inaccurately and be making all sorts of accusations that were proved untrue. It shows their complicitness in all of this. And then the fact that there's still been no justice delivered on this murder, these lynchings, these murders, it shows how apathetic the system is at large to protecting Hindus, and particularly the most gentle, most sweet, most peaceful community of Hindus, the Brahmin, you know, the Panditjis, the sadhus.
Right, right. Thank you so much for bringing this out and talking about it, Melissa ji. And on that, what I would like to ask is, a lot of people, even today, they focus on these events that have happened, horrific events that have happened in the past. But as you said, that this continues till this day. Could you please explain further how ethnic cleansing of Hindus continues till date?
Absolutely. And I'll just start my answer on this question by saying I'm involved in a few different networks with some senior officials that are trying to keep a track of these modern day cases, and we're preparing an official report that we plan to release soon. So I'll give some examples of actual cases that, if you're on Twitter, you can see very plainly for yourselves of Hindu genocide right before our eyes. So 25-year-old Rinku Sharma ji stabbed to death in Delhi, a 14-year-old boy in Karnataka killed, a whole Hindu family in Pakistan murdered, the rape and murder of a 12-year-old Pujari's daughter in Bihar, the hanging of young Pinky Kumarji, also in Bihar, the killing of 22-year-old Akash Mehra in Kashmir. I could go on and on. So many of these cases. That's literally just the last 2 weeks, a quick look on the social media, and I pulled those ones out. And the important thing is that all of these murders of Hindus were committed by people of the same other religious community. Mm-hmm. And these are obviously the tip of the iceberg, these cases, the ones that make it to social media. And that itself is the tip of the iceberg when it comes to, all of the cases out there, because actually so few make it to the social media, let alone make it to the mainstream media, mm-hmm. where they are completely, the religious motives are completely whitewashed. A few cases have made the mainstream media, such as, poor, terrible case of 2-year-old Twinkle Sharmaji, raped, killed in Aligarh, or 21-year-old Nikita Tomarji, victim of love jihad, killed in Faridabad, or Kamlesh Tiwar, shot, stabbed, throat slit. It really is so uncomfortable even to be talking about these cases. There are so many of them. Mm-hmm. And it's really good that there are people out there tracking them now and reporting on them. Another good place that I would recommend people look if they're interested to see the full extent of this situation is Swati Goel Sharmaji's Twitter handle, and some of her publications in Swaraja magazine, where she has recorded many of these cases. And importantly, she's highlighted the religious motives and the directionality of the religions of the victims and the perpetrators in there. So it's very clear what that directionality is. And it's also very sadly becoming quite clear to me that the number of killings of Hindus is actually increasing in recent years, is how it seems. Mm-hmm. And it seems like the people who are most at risk, certainly the Brahmins, the Panditjis, the Sadhus, it's young, attractive Hindu girls and their families who are trying to protect their daughters. It's proud young Hindu men, and it's politicians associated with, Hindu causes. These people are particularly at risk, it seems. But the truth is, all Hindus are at risk. Mm-hmm. And as a Hindu myself and a soon-to-be mother, I find this very distressing. When my husband, we're considering where in Bharat to move to raise our young family, it's really a dilemma we're facing when we're looking at a map of India. And instead of really focusing on the things that I would love to be focusing on, like where's the best climate for my preferences, what's the infrastructure like, I find I'm focusing more on what are the demographic changes in those regions. How many attacks are there on mandirs and on Hindus in those regions? And if the Break India forces were ever successful, what would the consequences for our physical safety be in those places? And so as with any genocide, the objective must be to make the genocide stop and make sure it never happens again.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that there are so few people who know about it, who acknowledge it, and it's growing in awareness, certainly, but it needs to be happening at a much, much faster pace. Because at the moment, the terribly sad situation is that, you know, if something were to happen to my young family and myself for being Hindus, I'm not sure, you know, justice would be served. And because that's rarely what happens when the victims are Hindus, quite often justice isn't served. And that's a very, very sad and scary, you know, thought and situation.
Mm-hmm. I understand, Melissa Ji. I'm just sort of processing this right now because suddenly you did point out all of these horrific instances and murders and lynchings that have been taking place, and yet not a lot of recognition goes to them. Furthering this conversation, what are the ways that you would say in which the Hindu self-esteem and identity are being targeted? Because we did in the beginning talk about genocide taking place not just physically, but in other aspects as well. We have seen horrendous Bollywood films, adverts, and fabricated news stories with doing hit job after one after the other. So perhaps you could elaborate on this, please.
Absolutely, and it's a very important point. So yes, genocide doesn't necessarily just happen through physical killing.
Mm-hmm.
It can also happen indirect, you know, physical killing of Hindus can also happen as a result of cultural genocide. But actually, cultural genocide itself is a form of genocide of Hindus. And what I'm talking about here are all of the attacks with false information, false narratives, manipulation that are leading to the coercion, the brainwashing, the incentivization of people to convert to other religions, for example, or just to be alienated from Hindu Dharma. And again, I'm part of a few think tanks that are trying to understand the ecosystem that is controlling all of this brainwashing, coercion, alienization. And the British Raj, the missionaries, they really are masters at destroying the Hindu intellect, the Hindu identity. You're replacing the education system with a very anti-Hindu, racist British education system, conducting what they call authoritative research and analysis on Hindu religion, Hindu society, where in truth, that research is just propaganda, you know, anti-Hindu propaganda, mistranslating and misinterpreting the Shastras. So many examples in which they're playing these mind games with Hindus and actually with, you know, with the whole world, creating these narratives. And what's sad is, you know, the narratives created by the British are, you know, quite popular narratives around the world today. And you may have come across the case of Rashmi Samantji, a young girl, not much older than yourself, I believe, or just VG, who is the victim of an absolute witch hunt at University of Oxford, you know, where I studied. She, you know, won the presidency of the union there, but she had to resign very quickly. She was forced to resign because the attacks on her Hindu identity, her Hindu religion, her Hindu way of life was so horrifying. And these are the same narratives, you know, that were created under the British, and they're still so, you know, prevalent today. So coming back to what you say about, you know, Bollywood and adverts, you know, this is one type of propaganda that is emerging from one of the Abrahamic faiths, particularly, you know, with the influence of Pakistan. And Gems of Bollywood, the Twitter handle there, Gems of Bollywood, you may have heard of, you know, they're doing a really grand job highlighting just how strongly Bollywood is demonizing Hindus, vilifying Brahmins, and basically sowing the seeds of hate that are causing Hindu genocide. And there's one theme, particularly in Bollywood and the Tanishq advert, that is very prominent at the moment, which is sort of romanticizing relationships between Hindu women and Muslim men at a time where the rate of love jihad is really escalating very fast. A report from actually the church in Kerala found that 4,000 women in Kerala were the victims of love jihad in between 2005 and 2012. And many of those women would have been Hindus. 21-year-old Nikita Tomarji is one relatively well-known example of a victim of love jihad. She was killed. OP India, the magazine, they're doing a really great job reporting on the less well-known cases of love jihad, and it really becomes apparent that Uttar Pradesh is a real hotbed for love jihad at the moment. And I just want to make the point that it's fine to obviously marry the person you love, but it must be with mutual respect. There must be no obligation to convert to the other's religion. It mustn't be the result of mind games, manipulation, grooming, essentially. And that, sadly, is what love jihad is. But moving then on to the other type of brainwashing and manipulation I see comes back to the other Abrahamic faith. And as someone who's an ex-Christian, it's something that I particularly follow and I'm trying to do something about. Because, for example, the Joshua Project, which is one of the largest missionary organizations in the world, they boast about evangelicalism increasing by, I think it's 3.9% a year. So it translates to about 1 million people a year, 1 million Hindus a year. But my sense is that that is just the tip of the iceberg again. We are looking probably at an order of magnitude greater than that, of people who are being coerced, manipulated into converting to Christianity. What I find equally worrying is some of the other, even more devious ways in which the missionaries are subtly converting Hindus into Christianity in so subtle ways, such devious ways that Hindus don't even realize it's happening. So one of the things that I find really terrifying is how all these WhatsApp forwards that I receive from friends and family in India, they flood India on a daily basis, because I'm receiving the same message from like 4 or 5 people in a single day. And I'm receiving so many of them. And it may seem very innocuous, but actually there's a very dangerous agenda with all of these little WhatsApp messages and pictures. So for example, I received a message on International Women's Day with some light-hearted joke. The thing is, that light-hearted joke was, the superficial part, because underneath it all, when you read it, it's talking about angels and the devil. So it's reinforcing this Christian thinking. Or there was a good morning message I received with a quote about forgiveness. Now, me as an ex-Christian, I could straight away see this is from the Bible, and lo and behold, I look it up. Yes, it's from the Bible. And in fact, there was a little logo on the bottom, so I could trace where this picture had come from, and it was a missionary organization. And so what they're doing is they're trying to rewire the Hindu brain into thinking like a Christian by every day just prompting them, sending them these little pictures, these little messages, these little quotes, to start rewiring their brains to think like a Christian. Because ultimately, the Christian concept of forgiveness is very different, and in many ways it's not consistent with the Hindu concepts of karma and dharma. And another example, at Christmas time, the few messages I receive from friends and families here in the UK have pictures of like cute dogs on, or sheep in the snow, and a message of, happy Christmas, season's greetings. But the pictures and the forwards I receive from India, they've got pictures of Jesus on them. So very Christian in theme, not at all sort of like a more materialistic Christmas, which is more what is here in the West, it seems. So what's happening is the missionaries are slowly converting Hindus into Christianity. And it's one of the reasons I feel very clearly why I have Hindu members of family, through my in-law side, who say their Ishtadev is baby Jesus. They've been receiving these messages for years and years and years. And so they see no issue with the fact that their Ishtadev is baby Jesus now, without realizing that means that they have to completely reject their belief in karma, in rebirth, in Brahman being within all of us. And, the fundamentals of being a Hindu are like the complete opposite of the fundamentals of being a Christian. So the next stage is she's going to become a full-on Christian, right? And I put it purely down to this propaganda of making Christianity seem so lovely and sweet. When at the same time, that's such a dangerous thing, because at the same time, there are all these false narratives being created to make Hinduism appear regressive, discriminatory, And that combination of, so lovely and sweet Christianity, but regressive Hinduism is a very, very dangerous combination. And sadly, I can see it flooding across India because of this missionary work. And that's absolutely what it is. Nobody can try and persuade me otherwise that I'm reading into things too much. These are quotes from the Bible. They're coming from missionary organizations. This is the situation.
Thank you so much for putting this out, Melissa ji. I think this is going to make me more conscious and aware of the messages that I receive. And talking about Hindu traditions and festivals, they are being particularly targeted, as you know. Can you please shed light on this, please? I mean, how can something or someone make festivals as beautiful and pure and joyous as Deepavali and Holi appear anything but benign, yet stay absolutely silent when trees are cut by billions and animals are slaughtered for other religious occasions? Could you please shed a light on this, please?
Absolutely. So the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People from 2007 places an obligation on member states to protect, preserve, and nurture Indigenous culture, traditions, knowledge with legislation, governance, and policy. Now, in the sad case of India, that is all placed or is available for external religions, external cultures. It's not available for the indigenous religion and culture. And that's why there are groups such as Equal Rights for Hindus that I support very strongly, who are trying to raise awareness of the fact that Hindus, our religion, our culture does not have equal rights, and people such as Nageshwar Raoji, Ritu Rathorji, doing excellent work to raise awareness of this and to try and change the situation. And yes, the result are these double standards between how other religions and cultures are treated versus how the indigenous Hindu culture and religion is treated in India. So, for example, Notre Dame, the cathedral in Paris, when that caught fire a few years ago, there was an outpouring of grief from the mainstream media and celebrities in India. At the very same time that Notre Dame caught fire, in those same few weeks, 7 temples in just Tamil Nadu caught fire, including the Meenakshi Amman temple in Madurai. And nobody even knows about it, let alone raises any money to help with the restoration. Other examples are how 1/4 of temple land in Andhra Pradesh has been encroached upon in recent years. And yet every time I go to India, when I go to visit now, I can only ever see churches on the most prime land, or Christian schools on the tops of hills with beautiful views out. And at the same time, 200,000 temples have been destroyed, is the estimate. And yet, again, every time I go to India, it seems like there's more and more churches. Even, for example, as you're driving down the highway, you'll just see church, church, church. And it's like nobody's even living here. Like who? Yeah. So I don't understand their purpose. There aren't the people to be filling these churches. It's almost, they're just symbols of conquest, essentially. And so, yes, these double standards, they would almost be laughable if it wasn't such a tragic situation. And other examples are, as you mentioned, the Hindu festivals being vilified, crackers, for example, being banned for Diwali on the basis of environmental impact, but crackers being allowed on other religious festivals, at cricket matches, at the weddings of celebrities, of Bollywood celebrities. And, I can see the consequences of this so clearly, because I really can feel how my Hindu family in India, my in-law family, they're getting so much more excited for Christmas each year. But this year, for Diwali, I only received one Diwali message from any friend or family in India. So you can see how their excitement for Diwali has been completely quashed. Or I've been hearing from Hindu parents about their children being sort of spoon-fed this idea of Diwali being damaging to the environment. They shouldn't really, celebrate it. But at the same time, their children are being asked by their teachers to buy these acrylic Christmas hats and wear them to school, or to ask their parents to buy a Christmas tree. And as you mentioned, the carbon footprint on those, I did some calculations over the Christmas period, the last Christmas period, and it's very, very massive, the carbon footprint of these acrylic red Christmas hats and acrylic Christmas trees, and just chopping down natural trees as well. So there's that aspect. There's also, as you mentioned, with Eid, not to mention the environmental damage caused by that, and the absolutely senseless there's very senseless and very damaging suffering that it's causing to all of these animals. And the fact that PETA, the animal rights activists, felt the nerve to be telling Hindus that they shouldn't be wearing rakhi made from leather when they were relatively mute on Eid, again, is showing these double standards. Or another example, in the temples, when the bureaucracy are interfering in the temple customs, and you see the support they're getting from people of other religions, where the hypocrisy of some of those situations is very, very stark. So this continual undermining of the Hindu festivals and the continuing bolstering of other religions, it's having some severe repercussions. So one very clear repercussion is the number of brazen attacks there are on temples and murtis at the moment. It's an everyday occurrence. In Andhra Pradesh, the Director General of the police there says that in 2020, just in Andhra Pradesh, there were 228 attacks on temples and murtis, and no culprits have been identified or brought to justice. Another example, no justice being delivered, is when Anurag Padarji was shot dead just for celebrating Durga Puja in Munger, Bihar. So this is pure, cultural genocide. And it's a very, very, very serious situation. And it's not, as I say, not only directly causing physical genocide, but it's causing genocide of the Hindu culture and the religion, which is another form of genocide.
Melissa ji, thank you so much for putting out these facts out there. And I would just like to honestly take a moment, because you have dedicated so much efforts to raising awareness of the Hindu genocide, that I just want to say thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts for this seva, really. And you have also made some points which should really be focused upon. And talking about that, you have previously made the point that the genocide of Hindus is a warning to the world. Could you please explain that?
Yes. So, yes, hundreds of millions of Hindus have already been killed. We have the evidence to show that. Does the world really want the blood of millions more innocent Hindus on its hands? The right to life, it's the most basic right that any human has. And so this Hindu genocide, it must stop, and it must not happen again. But for that to happen, people need to realize that it is happening. And at the moment, there's a growing awareness that it's happening. But I don't think there are any signs of it stopping yet. So we really need to be accelerating, making the world aware of Hindu genocide. And, one reason why it's so important, for people outside of the Hindu religion, why is it important for them? Well, it's important because Hinduism actually had so many solutions to offer the modern day world with its different crises and problems. So, skyrocketing rates of mental health issues, physical health problems, climate change, animal suffering, extinction of animal species, lack of respect for elderly generations and fragmented families, violence generally. Hindu Dharma has so much to offer the world as solutions to each of these issues. And because Sanatana Dharma, it's eternal. That's what Sanatan means. It's eternal. So it was very effective 20,000 years ago at keeping billions of people happy, healthy, and prosperous. It's got the same power to do so today, but importantly, it's got the same power to do so 20,000 years into the future, because it's an eternal knowledge. But the terrible irony of the situation is that, hundreds of millions of Hindus died to protect Hindu Dharma. And now, 72 years into India having the freedom to chart its own course, its own destiny, survival of Hindus is still not certain, due to physical killings still and that cultural genocide. So it's really important that we as Hindus, we raise awareness of Hindu genocide, its modern day existence as well as its historical existence, to explain the reasons why it's happening, and to be very frank about who the perpetrators are. And finally, to make the rest of the world aware of the beauty of Sanatana Dharma and how it has so many solutions to offer the world.
Thank you so much for putting it out so beautifully, Melissa ji, about the culture and the heritage of and the solutions that Sanatana Dharma has, not just for us right now, but it will continue to do so for eternity. My last question to you, Melissa ji, is what do you think Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji and the Indian government is doing to firstly tackle the genocide of Hindus and then all other religions affected by the brutality as well?
Very good question again. Thank you. So yes, it's 72 years since India gained, had the ability, certainly, to stop this genocide. But it's only really been in the last few years that people have started to talk about it. And, there have been some, those few fantastic, very dedicated people who've been spearheading that effort, doing research and publicizing it. And, social media has had a big role to play. But it definitely feels like the number of killings of Hindus is increasing in recent years. And so we need to be doing something like now. And we have to be doing it at an accelerated effort to raise awareness of Hindu genocide so that it can stop and never happen again. And so I feel it is probably the Indian government, it needs to be their number one foreign policy objective to make the world aware of Hindu genocide. It needs to be a dedicated effort. It needs to happen across the whole government. Nothing actually is more important. And if you look at Israel, they've done a fantastic job raising awareness of the Jewish Holocaust. India needs to be doing the same about Hindu genocide. And it's not just that it's, the righteous thing to be doing. And it's not just about, because what a loss to the world, the loss of Hindu culture and religion would be to the world. But it's actually directly in the government's interest to be making the world aware of Hindu genocide. Because at the moment, all of the false narratives that are out there that are seeing Hindus, Brahmins, and in a very poor light are actually stifling socio-economic development. The thing that Modi ji wants most, socio-economic development, to be ridding India of poverty, to be raising living standards, those efforts are being stifled because of false narratives that are out there. And so what the government needs to be doing is they need to be setting up a dedicated ministry staffed by the very best minds. And I wouldn't say they come from the bureaucracy directly. You probably need to be thinking more creatively. And through my interactions on social media with people such as the speakers on Festival of Bharat, the excellent speakers there, the speakers on Jaipur dialogues with Sanjay Dixit ji, so Shefali Vedia ji, True Indology, Neeraj Atri ji, Abhijit Chavdar ji, all these people I'm very, very fortunate to be in contact with. And whenever I speak to them, I am always just blown over with their intelligence, their depth of knowledge on so many different topics, and their creativity, their ability to think outside the box as to what the solutions to many of Bharat's problems are today. So we need to be corralling these people together, making them really brainstorm and coming up with a very clear, systematic plan to be making the world aware of Hindu genocide and doing things like overhauling the education system, freeing temples and empowering temples so that they can once again become centers of learning, giving them some grant to be doing that, creating whole new fields of academic research and, investing in the best quality academics and placing them very strategically in important, influential universities across the world to be driving these fields of research on true Hindu history, genocide, society, religion. And they need to be offering grants and awards to students to be excelling in these fields. And then, of course, the next thing is once you create this body of research, you need to be disseminating it. And this needs to be happening in a very coordinated, concerted way. So you need to be building museums on Hindu genocide. At the moment, I am only aware of Francois Gauthier-ji's museum, which I visited in Pune. Excellent museum. So please, people, go and visit. But we need many, many more. We need there to be many books, documentaries, movies, all with international reach on the topic of Hindu genocide. The Indian embassies, there needs to be a clear, directed plan and some resource available to them to be running exhibitions, discourses, seminars on Hindu genocide to get the message out to the whole world. And there needs to be a particularly special effort to getting the message out to Silicon Valley and places like this, places where many of the very strongly anti-Hindu narratives are very strong. So, Wikipedia, Quora, Twitter, these are the places I'm talking about. Because there are some very fantastic individuals I know who are taking it upon themselves to tirelessly be trying to talk the truth about Hindu Dharma, about India on these platforms, such as Maria Worthji. She's so tireless in answering questions on Quora about Hindu Dharma, about India, and she'll get tens of thousands of likes, but then she'll just get taken down. All of it's just gone. Or Nilesh Okji, I know he was a Wikipedia editor. I saw a tweet from him recently saying that it was completely futile because he would make an edit and reference it with high quality research. He would just get overruled and it would just disappear. So what was the point of him even trying in the first place? And so places like alternative platforms like Coup are excellent. But we can't abandon Quora, Wikipedia, Twitter, because if we do, they'll just become cesspits of Hindu hate, essentially. But we can't be relying just on these individuals to be fighting these battles. It needs to be a government approach. And the reason why I said earlier that we have to start immediately. Tomorrow is too late. It has to start today, because the anti-India, the anti-Hindu forces, they're getting stronger and stronger, and they are corralling more and more different groups into their thinking, giving them even more ammunition. Climate change activists, pop stars we're seeing recently, people you would never imagine would become associated with all this. They're building up all this ammunition. So we, as Hindus, we need to be building up our ammunition. It needs to be much better than theirs, much stronger, much more accelerated. And tomorrow is too late. It has to start today.
Thank you so much, Melissa ji. I mean, I'm just so inspired right now and motivated to do my research and work for our dharma and our cause. And I'm just deeply grateful for you to take out time right now and come here and have this conversation with us. Thank you so much. Namaste to you. And to all our viewers, please like, share, and subscribe. And we will keep on having these amazing, fantastic conversations with our speakers. Namaste to everyone, and namaste, Melissa ji. Thank you so much.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Chitti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.